Pirate first, PROTOCOLocracy V0.1 The Longevity Principality's Preliminary Statement. A. Subaquatic. Archipelago of sovereign nodes, civilization is a living laboratory. See the Longevity Principality. A subaquatic archipelago of sovereign nodes greater than we don't design the perfect society, we design a civilization capable of experimenting with societies. The TLP Liberation Protocol begins with an apparently simple proposition: what if longevity belonged to civilization rather than merely to individuals, not simply longer human lives? Longer memory, longer institutions, longer infrastructure, longer knowledge, longer relationships between generations, longer continuity between experiments. The result is not a city, it is an archipelago. The principality is not a kingdom. The word principality is deliberately provocative. There is no prince, there is no throne, there is no central government claiming ownership of the whole. The principle is sovereignty through persistent, interoperable nodes. Every participating cenote becomes a small jurisdiction with its own demographic composition, its own culture, its own facilities, its own economy, its own governance experiments, its own specialties, its own measures of success, its own failures, its own memory. The nodes are sovereign, but they are not isolated. Their survival depends upon complementarity. A node becomes valuable not because it contains everything. It becomes valuable because the rest of the archipelago needs something it does exceptionally well. The cenote is the unit of experiment. Each cenote is an experiment in civilization, not an experimental population, an experimental social environment. That distinction matters. The TLP does not take people and optimize them. It takes environments and asks, greater than what happens when different kinds of people are given different conditions under which to flourish. One cenote might deliberately concentrate people who have spent decades acquiring knowledge that conventional economies consider obsolete. Another might become an artistic engine, another a scientific node, another an agricultural and aquacultural system, another a fabrication and repair economy, another a school, another a diplomatic node, another a computational commons, another a place for people whose minds simply never fit comfortably inside existing institutions. The objective is not demographic uniformity, it is complementary diversity. The Centennial District. Consider the Centennial District. Its primary resource isn't land, it isn't capital. It is accumulated human experience, elders, master craftsmen, retired engineers, historians, former entrepreneurs, scientists, teachers, archivists, people carrying 50, 60, 70 years of tacit knowledge that normally disappears when their economic usefulness is declared finished. The district gives that knowledge infrastructure: workshops, archives, apprenticeships, intergenerational housing, teaching laboratories, repair facilities, memory institutions, and then it connects directly to the other nodes. The artistic district receives techniques, the mechanical district receives expertise, the educational district receives teachers, the scientific district receives institutional memory, the agricultural district receives generations of ecological knowledge. The Centennial District doesn't become a retirement home, it becomes a living knowledge reserve. The artistic district. Then place it beside something almost opposite, the artistic district: artists, musicians, designers, performers, filmmakers, architects, visionaries, people who deliberately mutate inherited assumptions. If the Centennial District remembers, the artistic district recombines. One preserves, one mutates, one accumulates, one destabilizes, one asks, greater than what have we forgotten? The other asks, greater than what if we were wrong? PROTOCOLocracy doesn't force them to agree, it creates reasons for them to need one another. The unlike minds. This is where the principality becomes genuinely pirate. The TLP should reserve space for people who don't fit, not because every eccentric is a genius, some aren't. That's precisely the point. A society capable of experimentation cannot know in advance which unusual minds will prove valuable: the obsessive, the eccentric, the inconvenient, the failed entrepreneur, the disgraced expert, the artist nobody understands, the person whose expertise became useless in one economy but indispensable in another, the exile, the contrarian, the person who simply refuses to become normal. PROTOCOLocracy asks a different question from conventional institutions, not greater than where do you fit, but greater than what environment might make your difference useful. Daniel Ortega's discovery. This is where Daniel Ortega becomes essential to the mythology. Daniel begins with the vocabulary of the old system: optimization, procurement, infrastructure, efficiency, resilience, vendor dependency, cost, return. He understands buildings as systems, and initially, that's exactly what the Treehouse is: a highly resilient piece of infrastructure: local power, local water, local food, local maintenance, local computation, local manufacturing, graceful degradation, no critical function dependent upon a proprietary external service. But Daniel slowly discovers something more important: infrastructure doesn't merely serve society, infrastructure determines what kinds of society are possible. The Treehouse changes him. He stops asking, greater than how efficiently can this building operate, and begins asking, greater than how much sovereignty can this building preserve? That is his evolution. The corporate systems he once understood so well had discovered how to make human capability persistent, but then turn persistence into ownership. The persistent service asset is the nightmare version of longevity. The body persists, the expertise persists, the labor persists, the corporation persists, but sovereignty disappears. The TLP must therefore solve the opposite problem: how do we make capability persistent without making people property? That becomes one of PROTOCOLocracy's founding questions. The PSA lesson: the Lifecycle Stack is what happens when persistence becomes extraction. A human being becomes a durable service layer. Their knowledge becomes transferable, their skills become redeployable, their biological substrate becomes recoverable. Eventually even death becomes an accounting Problem. The system becomes extraordinarily efficient precisely because it has eliminated the concept of ending. PSA's horror is therefore not that the technology fails. It is that the technology works. It makes human capability persistent, and then asks who owns the persistence. The longevity principality answers, greater than nobody owns. The person, greater than the node owns its infrastructure, greater than the community owns its institutions, greater than the individual owns their identity, memory and contribution, greater than the network owns nothing that it cannot legitimately be given. That last principle is crucial. The protocol layer every node shares a small constitutional layer. Non-aggression no node may use force to acquire another node. Freedom of exit you may leave. Voluntary association participation must remain voluntary. Transparency the important workings of the node remain inspectable. Sovereign jurisdiction each node governs its own social model. Interdependence trade, knowledge and services flow between nodes. Protection of the commons water, ecological systems, knowledge and future generations cannot simply become disposable assets. Right to experiment different nodes may try different ways of living. That final principle changes everything. The social layer below the shared protocol, almost anything can differ. Demographics, culture, governance, economics, architecture, education, healthcare, food systems, technology, religion or philosophy, work, family structures, art, leisure, even definitions of prosperity. The protocol establishes the minimum conditions for coexistence. The node determines what happens above them. This is the crucial distinction. Protocolocracy does not standardize society. It standardizes the ability of societies to coexist. The archipelago is evolutionary engine. The nodes therefore become a civilization-scale evolutionary system. Variation. Different communities try different things. Selection. People observe which arrangements work. Migration. People move toward systems they prefer. Replication. Successful protocol spread. Mutation. A successful idea changes when another node adapts it. Failure. A failed experiment doesn't have to destroy the civilization. It becomes data. The archipelago learns. The experimental life. A citizen does not necessarily spend an entire lifetime in one node. Someone might spend 10 years in the artistic district, move to the Centennial District, study ecological engineering in the agricultural district, spend 5 years in the computational district, then establish a new node. The citizen becomes a traveler through civilization's experiments. Identity becomes less, greater than I belong to this jurisdiction, and more, greater than I participate in this civilization. The node must be able to survive. This is Daniel Ortega's contribution. Every node must possess a local operating mode, not total isolation, not a bunker, not a fortress, a degradable sovereignty. If the outside network disappears, water continues, food continues, energy continues, maintenance continues, communication continues locally, knowledge remains available, people can still govern themselves. The node may reconnect whenever connection becomes useful, but connection cannot become dependency. Daniel's treehouse therefore becomes the architectural prototype for protocolocracy, a building that can disconnect without becoming helpless. That principle scales upward, from building, to neighborhood, to cenote, to archipelago. The economic principle. The nodes are deliberately not self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency sounds attractive but can become another form of isolation. Instead, the nodes are economically complementary. The agricultural district grows, the mechanical district builds, the Centennial district teaches, the artistic district creates, the scientific district discovers, the computational district remembers and computes, the diplomatic district mediates, the educational district transmits, the healing district restores, the maritime nodes connect the system, value flows, people move, knowledge moves, tools move, culture mutates, scarcity disciplines the network, complementarity makes it prosperous. The principality's strangest product. The TLP doesn't ultimately sell apartments, it doesn't sell tourism, it doesn't sell ideology. Its greatest export is knowledge about how humans can live. Every cenote generates protocols. Some will fail, some will become absurd, some will become brilliant, some will contradict one another. Good, that is the point. The principality isn't trying to produce one answer, it is producing a civilization capable of producing answers. And then there is the deepest rule. The longevity principality must never become another lifecycle stack, because the moment the network begins saying, greater than this protocol is objectively superior, and then forces every node to adopt it, protocolocracy has become teleocracy. The experiment has become doctrine. The network has become an empire. The pirate has become the administrator. So the ultimate constitutional safeguard is extraordinarily simple. No node is the answer. Not the Centennial District. Not the artistic district. Not Daniel's treehouse. Not even TLP. Every node is provisional. Every protocol can be challenged. Every institution must remain replaceable. Every citizen retains the right of exit. The pirate first principle. The old world asks, greater than what kind of society should everyone live in? The pirate asks, greater than why should there be only one? The old world builds institutions that attempt to survive by controlling their populations. The longevity principality builds institutions that survive by remaining useful to their populations. The old world turns persistence into ownership. The TLP turns persistence into continuity. The old world asks people to adapt to systems. The TLP allows systems to adapt to people, and that is the final transformation of Daniel Ortega. He began by designing a resilient building. He ends up designing something much more dangerous, a civilization in which no single building, institution, corporation, ideology or government needs to be right, because the civilization itself has learned how to experiment. Pirate first, protocolocracy. The longevity principality. A subaquatic archipelago of sovereign nodes greater than the world is not a problem. To be solved, it is an experiment to be inhabited, and perhaps the most pirate sentence of all, we don't seek permission to build the future, we build the conditions under which futures can exist.